September 19, 1944. The Lorraine countryside awoke under a heavy, rolling fog, a pale, silvery mist that draped itself over the fields and villages, softening the lines of hedgerows, concealing the shapes of trees, and swallowing everything beyond a few dozen meters. The air was damp, the scent of wet earth and frost-laden grass mingling in the chill of early autumn. In the quiet, almost imperceptible sounds of engines idling and distant artillery firing marked the presence of men and machines poised for combat. In Bisson-la-Petite, a small village nestled among the undulating hills, Panther Tank Commander Unteroffizier Karl Hoffmann adjusted the eyepiece of his periscope. He peered into the gray void ahead, straining to discern the advance of his own troops through the obscuring mist. His hands trembled slightly, not from the crisp September air, but from the image that had just flashed through the fog, something that defied all logic, all expectation, all the lessons he had absorbed over years of service. Through a brief opening in the mist, a shape appeared, fleeting and almost unreal. It moved with a speed and precision that was alien to Hoffmann's experience. 2 flashes of fire, and then it was gone. In its wake, a Panther lay smoldering 50 meters away, the blackened steel twisted by the sudden impact. For Hoffmann, trained on the doctrine of armored supremacy and the seeming invincibility of his Panther, the scene was incomprehensible. 42 Panthers from the 113th Panzer Brigade had advanced with confidence that morning. These were men who had fought on the Eastern Front, who had survived the brutal winter campaigns in Russia, and who understood armored warfare as a science calculated, deliberate, and deadly. The Panther, with its sloped armor and 75mm high-velocity gun, was the pinnacle of that science. It could deflect shells that would have destroyed lesser vehicles, and its combination of firepower and protection had been a source of pride and fear across the battlefields of Europe. The men of the 113th had been taught that American armor was inferior. They believed it hastily constructed, mechanically unreliable, manned by crews who relied on numbers rather than tactical skill. But the American vehicle that had just struck, moving with an almost ghostly speed through the fog, would challenge every assumption they held. Its name unknown to the German crews at the time was the M18 Hellcat. The Hellcat was a product of a distinctly American approach to warfare, a philosophy that prioritized mobility, agility, and tactical initiative over brute strength and armor. While the Germans pursued the evolutionary path of heavier armor and bigger guns, the Americans embraced revolution, seeking to build a vehicle that could strike hard and vanish before the enemy could respond. This concept was born in Fort Meade, Maryland, in December 1941, where Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Davis Bruce studied German blitzkrieg tactics with meticulous care. Unlike traditionalists who sought to match tanks with tanks, Bruce envisioned a force that would exploit speed and maneuver to achieve decisive results. His vision demanded 3 priorities, in precise order: speed, firepower, and crew efficiency. Armor, the holy grail of German tank design, was secondary, a radical departure from the prevailing norms of armored warfare. By July 1943, the first M18s rolled off the assembly lines at Buick's Flint, Michigan plant. These machines were powered by a Wright R975 radial aircraft engine, a 9-cylinder power plant generating 350 to 400 horsepower, the same as the Sherman tank but housed in a chassis weighing only 20 tons. This allowed the M18 to reach speeds of up to 55 miles per hour on roads, and maintain nearly 40 miles per hour across rough terrain, an entirely different class of mobility compared to the Panther's maximum speed of 29 miles per hour on roads. The contrast was stark, not only in terms of raw velocity but also in how it transformed tactics on the battlefield. German Panthers, their massive turrets weighing nearly 7 tons, required more than a minute to traverse a full rotation. Even under ideal conditions, tracking a target demanded time and precision. The M18, with its lighter turret and responsive hydraulics, could engage threats from any direction in a matter of seconds, often before the Panther crew had even identified the source of danger. This mechanical advantage was compounded by doctrinal innovation. Whereas German armor operated within the combined arms philosophy, with tanks advancing in concert with infantry and artillery, the M18 was a mobile, independent striking force. Tank destroyers were held in reserve, poised to respond to armored concentrations with lightning speed. They would move to flanking positions, strike from unexpected angles, and redeploy before the enemy could bring their superior armor and firepower to bear. The Panther, designed as an offensive spearhead, now faced a foe that refused to play by the rules it understood. Lieutenant Edwin Leeper and his platoon of 4 M18s from Company C, 74th Tank Destroyer Battalion, lay in concealment near Richelieu. Engines idled softly, their presence masked by the fog. The crews, trained meticulously on high-speed maneuvers, scanned the mist for any sign of the German advance. When the Panthers finally emerged, slow and methodical, the American vehicles sprang to life. In seconds, they accelerated from 0 to 30 miles per hour, a feat that took the Panther nearly half a minute to achieve. The Hellcats moved like phantoms, racing to flanking positions, firing with precision, and disappearing back into cover. 5 German tanks fell in a matter of minutes, their crews struggling to comprehend the force that had struck with such sudden, unanticipated violence. The encounter at Araort that morning was more than a clash of machines. It was a collision of philosophies. The Germans, conditioned to rely on armor and firepower, were confronted by a doctrine that turned mobility into a weapon. Every aspect of the M18 had been designed to exploit this principle. The torsion bar suspension allowed for high-speed travel across terrain that would have forced a Panther to slow to a crawl. The automatic transmission freed drivers to focus entirely on positioning and evasion. Radio communication allowed crews to coordinate their movements, alert one another to threats, and strike as a cohesive unit. Panthers moved in isolation, each commander reliant on his vision ports and intuition, unable to match the fluidity of the American attack. As the morning unfolded, the M18s demonstrated not just tactical efficiency but psychological dominance. German crews, veterans of the harshest battles on the Eastern Front, were being outmaneuvered by vehicles they had never imagined. The fog, once a concealing veil, now became a trap for the Panthers, allowing Hellcats to appear and disappear with ease. By the end of the first engagement, the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion had destroyed 10 German tanks, for the loss of only 2 M18s. Disparity in both effectiveness and cost. Panthers requiring over 2,000 man-hours to build, Hellcats only 500, underscored the revolutionary nature of American tank destroyer philosophy. In the gray, silent fields of Lorraine, the battle was not merely being fought with steel and gunpowder, but with ideas. The Americans had redefined what a tank could be, not a fortress on tracks, but a precision instrument of speed, agility, and initiative. The Panthers, mighty as they were, had been brought face to face with the limits of their evolutionary design. And in that encounter, the M18 Hellcat had begun to rewrite the rules of armored warfare forever. As the morning fog slowly lifted from the Lorraine fields, the full effect of the M18 Hellcat's presence became apparent. German tank crews, conditioned to expect linear engagements and armored duels, were confronted with an enemy that moved in a manner entirely foreign to their experience. The Panthers, which had once inspired confidence with their imposing silhouettes and long-barreled 75mm guns, now seemed sluggish, their very weight a liability in a war increasingly defined by speed and maneuverability. Lieutenant Edwin Leeper's platoon exemplified the American doctrine in action. Using the cover of terrain, hedgerows, and broken ground, the M18s executed coordinated strikes with breathtaking efficiency. One vehicle would draw the attention of the German gunners, daring them to target what appeared to be the most vulnerable point, while its companions moved unseen along flanking paths. In these moments, the fog that had concealed the German advance became an ally of the Americans, hiding the movements of the Hellcats and amplifying the psychological shock. Sergeant Henry R. Hartman, commanding one of the M18s that morning, became a figure of legend within the battalion. From his concealed position, he watched as Panther after Panther lumbered forward, unable to traverse their heavy turrets quickly enough to engage a threat that was already moving past them. Hartman's technique was precise. Strike from unexpected angles, fire rapidly, then displace before counterfire could be organized. Within 5 minutes, his M18 had destroyed 6 German tanks, each shot delivered with calculated intent. For the Panthers' crews, the experience was terrifying. These were men who had survived brutal battles against the T-34 and KV-1 on the Eastern Front. Yet they now faced a foe whose speed and tactics rendered their training almost meaningless. The disparity between the two forces was not merely a matter of raw velocity. The Hellcat's engineering reflected a deep understanding of operational realities. Its torsion bar suspension allowed high-speed travel across uneven terrain, while its lightweight turret permitted rapid target acquisition. The automatic transmission meant that drivers could concentrate entirely on maneuvering, freeing them from the complex manual shifting required in German tanks. Meanwhile, each M18 carried a reliable FM radio, enabling real-time communication between vehicles and with supporting units, a capability that German tankers could scarcely match. Panthers and Tigers, built for protection and firepower, were now handicapped by their own design. The engagement at Araort extended over several hours, each moment reinforcing the revolutionary nature of American doctrine. Panthers that had been thought invincible were systematically destroyed, their losses amplified by mechanical failures brought on by the demands of rapid maneuvering. Final drives overheated, suspensions failed, and tracks were thrown as crews struggled to pursue a foe that moved with impossible speed. By mid-morning, the 113th Panzer Brigade had lost nearly 10 tanks. Not through reckless aggression, but through the disciplined, coordinated application of speed, mobility, and tactical ingenuity. American forces, meanwhile, adapted in real time. Observers noted that M18 crews did not merely engage and retreat. They used the battlefield itself as an instrument of warfare. Open fields became launch points for sudden assaults. Forested areas served as avenues for flanking maneuvers, and broken ground concealed rapid redeployments. The Hellcats moved in concert, maintaining a rhythm that the German commanders could not anticipate, let alone counter. Captain Tom Evans, leading the company's C platoon, orchestrated these movements with precision, vectoring each vehicle to maximize the effect of its firepower while minimizing exposure to enemy guns. By noon, the German advance had effectively stalled. Panthers and accompanying infantry were trapped in what could only be described as a kill zone. Shermans, operating in tandem with the Hellcats, struck the German flank while the M18s raced past, striking at side armor and vulnerable rear compartments. It was a scene of controlled chaos where superior mobility and coordination dictated the outcome more than armor or caliber. By the end of the engagement, American tank destroyers had destroyed 10 more German tanks, losing only 2 more of their own vehicles. The psychological toll on German crews was profound. For decades, the doctrine of armored supremacy had dominated their thinking. The heaviest armor, the most powerful guns, meticulous formation discipline, all of these principles had defined their victories and mitigated losses. Now, those certainties were shattered. The M18 had introduced a new variable into the equation, one that could not be accounted for by existing manuals or experience. Panthers designed for domination now found themselves reactive, defensive, and often overwhelmed by a foe that refused to engage in predictable patterns. Even tactical improvisation could not entirely mitigate the threat. Some German units attempted to operate Panthers back-to-back, covering all angles, yet this required stationary positioning, surrendering initiative to the Americans. Others tried to coordinate flanking attacks, but without reliable communication systems, coordination remained haphazard. Meanwhile, the M18s continued to exploit the terrain, visibility, and their unmatched speed. The battalion's FM radios allowed each vehicle to report positions, track targets, and coordinate strikes in real time, turning individual engagements into a symphony of coordinated maneuvers. By September 22nd, the battle had evolved further. Lieutenant Colonel Crichton Abrams of the 37th Tank Battalion coordinated combined operations with the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion. Sherman tanks would advance slowly, drawing German fire, while M18s, invisible until the last moment, would surge forward from multiple directions. The Panthers, expecting a linear confrontation, found themselves simultaneously engaged from angles they could not defend. Speed, once a mere measurement of velocity, had become a weapon in its own right. The consequences extended beyond the battlefield. German officers began to understand that their tactical and industrial assumptions were no longer sufficient. A single Panther cost 117,100 Reichsmarks and required 2,000 man-hours to construct. An M18 cost less than half and could be built in a fraction of the time. Losses at Araort, while numerically modest, represented a strategic setback. Each destroyed Panther was more than a tactical defeat. It was an erosion of the German ability to maintain armored dominance across multiple fronts. By late afternoon, the Americans had demonstrated not just superiority in mobility, but also in mechanical reliability. M18s covered hundreds of miles in the campaign with minimal maintenance. Their engines, mounted on steel rollers, could be removed and serviced in hours rather than days. Torsion bar suspension, simple transmission, and robust design ensured operational readiness even under extreme stress. Panthers, by contrast, were vulnerable to overheating, track failures, and final drive breakdowns, especially when forced to pursue the rapid maneuvers of the Hellcats. In quiet moments between engagements, one could observe the human side of this revolution. German crews, faces drawn with fatigue and fear, often abandoned tanks not to American shells, but to mechanical failure. M18 crews, conversely, exhibited a mixture of confidence and discipline, moving like dancers across the battlefield, each maneuver calculated to maximize advantage while minimizing exposure. It was a form of warfare as much intellectual as mechanical, where observation, anticipation, and adaptation were as decisive as the gun itself. The battle at Araort, though localized, would resonate across the Western Front. It demonstrated in stark terms the effectiveness of speed, coordination, and doctrinal innovation against even the most sophisticated armored vehicles. By evening, the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion had destroyed 39 German tanks for the loss of just 4 M18s, a ratio that would be studied for years by both Allied and German military analysts. Through the mist and smoke of Lorraine, the M18 Hellcat had not merely proven a concept. It had rewritten the rules of armored combat. It had taken the evolution of armored warfare and replaced it with revolution. The battlefield, once dominated by armor and firepower, now belonged to the swift, the adaptable, and the coordinated. And for the German crews who had once relied on the invincibility of their machines, a profound lesson had been learned. In the age of mechanized warfare, speed, flexibility, and ingenuity could triumph over even the most formidable steel. As the days of September 1944 unfolded, the consequences of the M18 Hellcat's presence in Lorraine became increasingly evident. The German armored units, particularly the 113th and 111th Panzer Brigades, faced an unprecedented predicament. Their doctrine, honed through years of experience on the Eastern Front, relied on slow, deliberate movements, heavy armor, and concentrated firepower. Yet, against the Americans, speed had become the decisive weapon, and every principle the German tankers had once trusted seemed inadequate. By September 24th, Lieutenant Colonel Crichton Abrams had orchestrated a masterful combination of Sherman tanks and M18 tank destroyers in a coordinated assault. The Shermans, deliberately advancing in plain view, acted as decoys, drawing German fire and attention. Meanwhile, M18s, invisible in the terrain until the last possible moment, darted across fields and through wooded sections, striking vulnerable flanks and rear armor. Panthers, designed to dominate through deliberate calculation, found themselves outmaneuvered. Their turrets, heavy and slow, could not track targets moving at impossible speeds. Each Panther destroyed by a Hellcat reinforced a growing realization among German commanders. Their traditional concepts of armored warfare were being systematically invalidated. The psychological impact on German crews was profound. These men, veterans of campaigns that had forged the myth of German armored invincibility, now faced a foe who refused to fight according to their expectations. The foggy fields of Lorraine, once a familiar setting, had become a theater of terror. Panthers that had once inspired confidence now appeared sluggish and vulnerable. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every fleeting engine sound, hinted at the arrival of an unseen lethal adversary. By September 25th, senior German officers were issuing new tactical orders, instructing crews to avoid engagement with the tank destroyers wherever possible, acknowledging that conventional tactics could no longer secure victory. Yet the M18's effectiveness was not solely rooted in fear or deception. Its design was a triumph of both engineering and doctrine. The Hellcat could reach speeds up to 60 miles per hour, outpacing even the most advanced German armor. Its torsion bar suspension and lightweight chassis allowed rapid movement across broken terrain that would have slowed the heaviest tanks to a crawl. Radio communication provided real-time coordination, enabling platoons to strike as cohesive units, each vehicle aware of the other's positions and targets. This combination of mobility, coordination, and operational reliability allowed relatively few M18s to achieve results that had once required entire armored brigades. By the end of September, the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion had destroyed 39 German tanks at Araort for the loss of only 4 M18s, a kill-to-loss ratio that astonished both sides. German losses were compounded not only by tactical failures but by mechanical ones. Panthers suffered frequent final drive failures under the strain of rapid maneuvering. Transmissions overheated, and tracks were thrown in the chaos of pursuit. By contrast, M18s required minimal maintenance. Their engines could be removed and serviced in less than 2 hours, a process that would have taken a full day for a Panther. The M18, in essence, transformed mobility into survivability, allowing American crews to strike, vanish, and strike again with minimal interruption. The tactical lessons of Araort echoed far beyond Lorraine. In December 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, the strategic value of speed and mobility was again demonstrated. German forces seeking to deliver a decisive blow initially achieved surprise. Yet as M18-equipped battalions rushed to critical positions, they disrupted German timetables and blocked advances with a swiftness that heavy armor could not match. Panthers and Tigers, designed to overpower through firepower and armor, were repeatedly confronted by Hellcats that had already secured advantageous positions, striking from unexpected angles and disappearing before effective retaliation could be mounted. The success of the M18 was not merely a tactical victory. It represented a transformation in military thought. German officers, both during and after the war, reflected on encounters with the Hellcat with a mixture of awe and apprehension. The Panther, a marvel of engineering, could no longer guarantee battlefield dominance. Its very strengths, armor, firepower, deliberate maneuvering became liabilities against an enemy that rejected conventional combat norms. The lesson was clear: adaptation, innovation, and flexibility could outweigh brute strength and technical perfection. In the aftermath of the war, the legacy of the M18 Hellcat endured. Its design philosophy influenced generations of armored vehicles, emphasizing speed, maneuverability, and operational reliability as critical components of effectiveness. The chassis of the M18 proved so versatile that 650 early production vehicles were converted into M39 armored utility vehicles during the Korean War, serving as troop carriers and mobile platforms, demonstrating the enduring adaptability of its design. Veterans on both sides carried vivid memories of the M18's impact. American tank destroyer crews spoke with pride of a vehicle that allowed them to shape the battlefield, to move faster than thought possible, and to execute maneuvers that seemed almost impossibly coordinated. In 1985, at a reunion in Araort, survivors from both sides walked to the battlefield where the Hellcats had demonstrated their revolutionary power. A restored M18, even 40 years later, could still achieve remarkable speeds, racing across the fields where once Panthers had fallen, and drawing silent, awed observation from the German veterans who had once faced it. A statistical record reinforces the profound effectiveness of the M18. Across the European theater, M18s were credited with destroying over 500 enemy vehicles, while sustaining relatively modest losses. The kill-to-loss ratio, particularly when considering the M18 was often deployed in support of infantry or in secondary roles, reflected not just superior engineering but superior doctrine and tactical understanding. In the end, the M18 did more than destroy enemy tanks. It shattered assumptions, undermined morale, and reshaped the way armies would think about armored warfare. The story of the M18 Hellcat is more than a tale of machines and battles. It is a story of innovation, adaptability, and the courage to challenge established doctrines. It reminds us that in warfare, as in life, success is often determined not by size or strength alone, but by speed, intelligence, and the willingness to embrace new ideas. The Hellcat was not a brute force instrument. It was a manifestation of human ingenuity, combining engineering brilliance with tactical acumen to create a weapon that could outthink and outmaneuver a superior opponent. As the war drew to a close and the fields of Lorraine returned to quiet once more, the legacy of the M18 Hellcat remained indelibly etched in memory. It had not only reshaped armored warfare, it had demonstrated the value of adaptation over rigidity, of speed over sheer size, of ingenuity over brute force. For the German crews who had once relied on their Panthers and Tigers, the encounter with the Hellcat was a humbling lesson in the evolving nature of war. For historians, military strategists, and engineers, it remains a testament to the power of revolutionary thinking, and a reminder that in the theater of human conflict, sometimes the swiftest, most adaptable, and most perceptive prevail. In the final analysis, the M18 Hellcat story transcends the battlefield. It is a story of vision, of technological daring, and of the human capacity to reimagine the tools and methods of warfare. From the fog-covered fields of Lorraine to the frozen roads of the Ardennes, from the assembly lines of Flint, Michigan, to post-war armored doctrine, the Hellcat left a mark that extends far beyond the losses it inflicted.